clapping for you.
Thank you, Katie. Hi, I'm Georgia Stitt. That was a fantastic introduction, and I'm really, really honored to be sharing the stage with Jessica, Dr. Morel. Should I start?
Yeah. All right.
We're winging it because we've just met, but we had a really great introductory Zoom call where we got to know each other, and it was like, yes, and another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And so I'm hopeful that we can address whatever questions you have after you've gotten to know us a little bit better. As Katie said, I have a classical background as a musician. I grew up playing piano, classical piano, competing as a pianist. I went to Vanderbilt University's Blair School of Music and majored in music theory and composition. And then I moved to New York City and got a master's degree at NYU, and my master's is in musical theater writing, which is an MFA program that pairs composers and playwrights together. And I say it's a master's degree in collaboration. It's basically over the course of 2 years, you learn how to write many different types of theater, musical theater, one acts, operas, really commercial tap dancey things, really legit operatic things. And then I worked primarily as a music director in the musical theater industry in New York for over a decade. Started working in film and TV and music production, and was always composing on the side. And I would say about 10 years into my career, I was able to flip the balance and work more fully as a composer and music director on the side. So now I get to pick and choose what I play and what I conduct. A lot of gala benefits, one-off things, special events, playing for performers, but most of the time is spent writing and also organizing and maintaining Maestra, which is, we'll show you this video in a little bit, the not-for-profit organization that I founded that Katie set up so beautifully. Our mission statement is that we provide support, visibility, and community for the women and non-binary people who make the music and the musical theater industry, and that includes Broadway-style musicals and opera. Basically anyone who works in the music department in those fields who feels underrepresented because of their gender. And then also we partner with a sister organization called Muse, which is Musicians United for Social Equity, and they do very similar work to ours, specifically for people of color. So all told, we're doing work for race and gender equity in the music departments in theater.
And I'm Jessica Morel, and I think one of the cool things about having us as a duo up here is that I'm more in the world of orchestral conducting, and she's more in the world of musical theater. There's a little bit of crossover, but sometimes those worlds are kind of separate. Like they're very different. You're either like a conductor for musical theater or you're a conductor for orchestras, but it's not usually crossing over. So we get to deliver the viewpoints from two similar but different worlds and kind of compare and contrast the similarities. I think there's a lot of similarities. So I get to kind of offer my view on that. Like Katie mentioned, I have some experience working with professional orchestras. My main gig right now is with the Greater Princeton Youth Orchestra, but I do still have some of those professional gigs on the side as well. So, but yeah, we're both conductors, we're both women in music and musical leaders. And I guess we should probably talk about your project, Maestra, and
Sure.
kind of how it came about.
Yeah, so the origin of Maestra, I didn't know I was starting a not-for-profit organization when this began. What I was doing was conducting the off-Broadway production of Sweet Charity in 2016 into 2017. If you're a person who pays attention to musical theater, that was the production that Sutton Foster played Charity. Lee Silverman was the director, and she tasked me as music director and also my friend Mary Mitchell Campbell, who is the orchestrator, to hire an all-female band. And she had a dramaturgical reason for doing so. She said she was playing with the idea that Charity, the character of Charity, was a different person when she was alone in her dressing room with the women that she worked with than when she had to put on armor and go out in the world. And the story of Charity is that she's trying to find a boyfriend. She's trying to find somebody to love. it's one of those hooker with a heart of gold stories, if you don't know it. And she's just a good girl, and she's trying really hard. But because a lot of her songs happen when she's in the safe space with the women in her dressing room, and the band is playing them, and the band is visible on stage, she said, I would like an all-female band, because then we reinforce this idea that she's different when she's among women. And no one had ever given me a dramaturgical reason before why I should hire women specifically for my orchestra or my band. And so I said, okay. And that process, it was a reduced orchestration. There were only 6 of us. I was one of them. The mandate was all women or non-binary people and a diverse of races, not all white people, no default to white. And we said, great, no problem. And in fact, it turned out to be really, really hard. And when we Mary Mitchell and I looked for the musicians, particularly in the rhythm section, rhythm guitar players, drummers, bassists. The contractors, who are the people that often recommend musicians to hire, said, oh, yeah, there's a great guitar player in New York. You should call Anne. And I said, well, Anne's busy. She's playing this Broadway show right now. Who else do you have? And they're like, oh, we usually just call Anne. And I was like, okay, so then I'd ask someone else. And they said, oh, Anne is great. And so finally I called Anne, and I said, you're the only person in New York who can play the guitar, apparently. You're the only woman in New York who can play the guitar. Who are your students? Who are your referrals? Who are your subs? And she, of course, had a big, long list of other people that she recommended. And so that I started doing that with every instrument and built a spreadsheet of these are the women and non-binary people who are skilled and ready to work in New York. And when we finally hired our ensemble, most of them said, I've been trying to figure out how to break into this business for a long time. Nobody's ever given me a chance. And so I thought, okay, well, now I'm sitting on a gold mine. I have this spreadsheet, but I don't want to field all the emails from people saying, I hear you know all of the female bassists in New York City. And so I hired a web designer to create a website that has a directory functionality, and these women can put their own profiles in, and like, here's my headshot, and here's how you can find me through my website, here's my Instagram page, here's a sample of me playing, that sort of thing. And I started by reaching out to the women on my spreadsheet and said, why don't you just put yourself in this directory, and then people can find you and you'll be visible for hiring purposes. And it grew and grew and grew and grew. And now we have 1,800 people in that directory. It's global. We're broken down into regional groups and all kinds of search filters. Like if you need to hire, let's say, a pianist who conducts in Washington, D.C. and also plays the accordion and is a member of the Musicians Union and knows Logic, which is a software, you can put all of those filters in, and anyone who has clicked those things accordingly shows up, and then you can call them and say, we don't necessarily say this person is the right person for your job, this person is hireable, but we say this person has presented themselves, and now it's your job to interview and find and see if that person. But the whole goal of it was to combat this idea that these women don't exist, because I heard that a lot. Like, you're not going to find a female drummer. You're not going to find a female drummer of color. You're not going to find a non-binary bass player. You're not going to. I was like, of course you are. Of course you are. They exist. And so that was the beginning of what grew into Maestro, which is a not-for-profit organization. And this might be a good time to show the video.
Here we go.
Maestra is a powerful resource. We need more women music makers on Broadway.
Working to make sure that in the future, quality is not a question.
White men are willfully keeping opportunities from those who don't look like them.
Every pit that I clean in were all men. I think many times we have heard people say, I would like to hire women, but I just don't know where to find them.
Maestra is a not-for-profit organization that I started 2.5 years ago. The directory that we built is the go-to resource in our industry for people who say, I want to hire more diversity. I don't know where to find them.
There's only been one female orchestrator to have worked on Broadway in the last decade.
Why didn't anybody think of this before?
Community is sustenance. Community is support. It's something that's hopefully going to help a lot of people.
I hear all the time from the instrumentalists that I work with that they get jobs through the Maestro directory.
I was working on a project. We went on the Maestro database and we found a number of female music directors working in the area.
For the longest time, there were a million reasons about why there weren't more women working in the musical theater. Maestra is systematically knocking down all of those obstacles.
Actually having a place to come together and hear how other people are working and how other women are making it work.
This organization is filling a really important need.
I just think it's a brilliant and so necessary organization.
There's lyricists, librettists, music directors. There's an organization we can point to and say, here they are, hire.
And this year we're hiring a statistician to look at what the numbers really are in the industry so that we can tell the story and tell it definitively and change it.
Thank you for creating a path for the women of my generation.
That was Anne, the guitarist, in there. Thanks. So we can start there. That's the origin story of Maestra. And it's interesting because every time I watch that, I bristle a little bit. There's one moment where a member of our advisory board she says, white men are willfully keeping the jobs from something else. And I can't hear the end of that sentence because I'm bristling. And I think that is something that we've learned over time, is that that in order to move forward, we say we're a yes and organization, that it's not us against the world. I don't agree. I don't believe that anymore. I did at the beginning, but I don't believe that anymore, that people are necessarily willfully keeping jobs from women. I believe that historically we've had a pattern of hiring people that are like you, hiring people that you've worked with before, hiring people that I was guilty of it myself. In the early days of hiring as a music director, they'd say, oh, we're putting together this concert and we need a rhythm section. I'd be like, great, I'll call my boys. And they'll come and they'll play. I even did a concert that was all women composers one time, and I was like, great, I'll call my boys. It never occurred to me at the very beginning of this process that maybe I could look harder and maybe I could address my own internal biases and say, maybe the people that I've always hired are not necessarily the right people for this job. And I think part of that is feeling pushback from a community that feels like their jobs are threatened. That perhaps, I've heard a lot of people saying oh, the women are coming from us, they're taking the job. You can't get hired if you're a white man anymore. And I think what we're doing is making the pool of candidates bigger. And so it just makes everyone more competitive. It makes everyone have to rise to the top of the game. You should be able to hire the best musicians, period. We're just making sure that that there aren't certain musicians that are invisible to you in the process while you're looking.
I was about to say it kind of creates visibility. It's not necessarily saying white men are no longer going to get jobs performing. It's more about there are these people and also a lot of these other people over here shining a light on, people that may not have that light automatically on them. In the orchestral world, what happens when an orchestra is trying to find a conductor, they go through a search process. And nowadays, most committees are very conscious of, we want to have variety, we want to have diversity in the candidates that come and audition for either the assistant conductor position or the music director position. And I think that we talked about it being like a pendulum, it used to be kind of only white males that were being invited to things, and now luckily today it's swinging back into the diversity thing. But I would argue, I always take the stance that yes, we want to invite diverse candidates, but I don't want my white male friends to not feel like they don't have a chance, So I think that I still vouch for everyone, that everyone should have kind of that equal opportunity to be invited and to be in the search and to be noticed, so that, it's kind of a parallel a little bit, where we are trying to kind of include everyone, but also not, what would you call it? Exclude people. Yeah, I was going to say just include, no.
Well, we say there are lots of reasons why people are invited into the room. If I get invited to a project, either as the composer or as the music director, then I say I get into the room. That means that I'm allowed to do my work because I've been invited into the room. But if I can't do the job, I'm going to be kicked out of the room. You have to be able to do the job once you're in the room. So there are lots of reasons why people get invited into the room, and then you have to show up and be able to do the work. And so what we're both saying is that just trying to create more equity in the process of how someone is either invited into the room, or perhaps even eliminating the idea that you have to be invited, but that there's more access, that there are more ways for people to put themselves forward instead of having to know someone to be invited, that there's not such an insider process to how you get into the room.
Right. And I think that the database, it's so helpful. As a youth orchestra director, we sometimes invite people to do master classes, and one of the things that I've been dealing with is actually our last 4 masterclass artists have been male. And that's like, it's not necessarily something I purposely did. It was just kind of like who I knew. But then I realized I want to actually bring more diversity. You know, I want to include someone of color and a female masterclass artist, and how much easier it would be on the classical side of things if there was some kind of database that was equivalent. And Maestra is mostly musical theater, right?
It is mostly musical theater, but the places where we do crossover, I think, are among the musicians, the players. Like, I think certainly the composers tend to be more, either you write, I mean, every now and then I'm writing an oratorio, but mostly what I do is write musical theater. There is crossover. But if you're a French horn player, you might play in both worlds, for sure. You might, or if you're a violinist, a lot of the people that I know that are instrumentalists work in both spaces. And they are in our directory, and they have mostly classical bios, and then they say, she also played in the national tour of Miss Saigon or something. And you're like, okay, then you belong, yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yep.
There are a lot of crossover musicians, like people that do a lot. I just met someone that did our sectionals in the youth orchestra. She said that she plays viola in Hamilton, So there are a lot of people that do both. But in terms of, the difficulties, not only in being invited or being seen or like being hired, but also kind of being on the job, that was something that we discussed. As a female musician and as someone who's, leadership in particular for women. I think that most women, and this is something that I think applies to everyone, is female leadership and kind of the struggles of what is it that makes it so difficult sometimes. What are our barriers? And I was talking about how sometimes it's hard to say no to things. Sometimes you, as a female, you always want to say yes, and you want to accommodate people, and you want to so I don't know if we wanted to kind of go in that direction.
Let's get into that. Yeah, well, we were talking about it when we were getting to know each other earlier, but that there is, this is a little bit of armchair psychology. Like, I don't know that I have the stats to back all of this up, but I will say anecdotally from my own experience, I feel like I was raised to be a bit of a people pleaser and to like to not make waves and not disrupt and not be the one who creates conflict, or in fact be the one that resolves conflict, or to be the one that's like, well, maybe there's a way we can all be happy here. And that sort of the worst thing that you can be is unlikable, and that turns into name calling, that women get called things, and when you think about the women who are at the top of their game, they often get called names, or they're just why. The relationship between women and power is really interesting to dissect. But a story that I tell, I sat on a panel one time with Bobby Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez. They are the songwriting team. They're married to each other, and they wrote Frozen. So they wrote all the songs for Frozen. And they have written several other things for Disney and Broadway. And Kristen said, if we present a draft and our director reads it and then our director gives us notes, like say our director gives us 5 notes, these are things that you should fix. I read them and I'm like, these are all really bad notes. I don't want to make any of these changes. And Bobby also says, yeah, these are really bad notes. I don't want to make these changes. Kristen says, we should probably take 2 of them. We should probably, just so we seem like team players, just so we don't piss off our director, just so we don't seem like they're impossible. And Bobby's like, they're bad notes. Like, why are we going to take bad notes? We should go back in the room and say, here's why we're not taking those notes. And Kristen's like, I don't think I could do that. And I'm making up the dialogue, but that's how the conversation spins out. And they have acknowledged together that this is gendered. This is just about the way that they were raised and the way they're told to accommodate and make space for compromise, or is it okay for me to be so didactic and say, I'm exactly right and there's no room for your idea, or, and I think about that too, about the way that I was socialized to be a bit of a peacemaker, and what that means when you step into a situation where you actually have to command the room, even if it creates confrontation, where you have to say, I don't have time for, you're not going to say it in this rude way. See how even I'm checking myself, I don't want you to think I'm rude, yeah. But I don't have time for all of these questions because what we have to do is get to the end of the rehearsal process, and that's what we're going to do right now. And so here we are, measure 36, let's go. You know, that kind of, and you're like, oh, so I'm sorry. And other things, like sometimes when I'm writing an email, I get to the end of it and I go back and I edit out where I said, I think we should probably have a conversation about that. Like, we should have a conversation about that. You know, they're just things that you're taught about accommodating, and that we have to retrain ourselves in order to be in positions of authority. I always, when I say things like this, I want to say, I can imagine men in the room being like, I do that too. Like, that's not, I'm going to say as a majority, I feel it is a gendered thing, but not in a unilateral way.
I feel like there's a nervousness or trepidation around like seeming to be too bold. You know, wanting, if you say, we should do this, it seems like you are afraid of being like too assertive. You know, that there's somehow instilled in us that we have to be like, well, maybe we should do this, or can we consider doing this? And, you know, where does that come from? Why is it that we can't just say, let's do this? And why is it harder for women to be bolder? I mean, and it may be that for a lot of women, it comes more naturally, you know, and some women are more naturally that way. But I would say in general that women can kind of struggle with being assertive and being confident and saying, like, let's just do this.
And they're judged harshly, I think. Like, we can all think of instances where someone was bold and commanding, and we're judged harshly for that. And then the opposite can be true when you're like not bold and not commanding, and you can be judged harshly for that as well. Like, oh, she's so meek, you know, in that situation. So trying to find that line. And I think I have gotten a lot of rewards, social rewards in my life for being likable, for being fun, or being nice, or, you know, like, she's easy to work with. And so when you start to get the positive feedback for that, you're like, oh, that's my lane. That's how I'm going to be successful. And then you realize you can only go so far in that without bumping up against some resistance.
Yeah, I remember when I guest conducted in front of I think it was the Oklahoma City Philharmonic, and I remember someone said to me afterwards, like, oh, or someone said something about me, and they're like, oh, she knows what she wants. And it was like, why is that weird? You know, why is
You're
that...
the conductor. You better know what you want.
Like, why is that something, like, would you actually say that about a male conductor? And I think that it's maybe surprising or shocking when you actually get up on the podium and you are assertive. Of course, as a conductor, I've had a lot of that. Like, that's just what you're supposed to do. Like, that's how you're trained. And when you're in front of a professional orchestra, if you are not that way, you're just like, you're not going to get their respect.
The orchestra will turn on you very quickly. They'll decide that you don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, oh.
And as you know, especially if it's like a pops concert, you have to get things done really quickly. You have no time to hesitate or be meek, you know. I was also, did you want to?
Well, I just want to, hold that thought, but we were also talking about how, because historically there have been so few women in leadership, specifically in the conductor position, there's been much more so in terms of visibility, I'd say in the last 20 years or so. You can see, like, if you Google an image of woman composer, there are a lot of them. You'll see a lot of pictures. But I think certainly when I started conducting, almost every time I conducted, somebody would come up from the audience and be like, oh, I've never seen a lady before. Like, how cool is that? Usually, like, in a positive way, but always like, really? Never, ever? And so we face, in the maestro community, a lot of times our younger conductors are saying things to us like, what am I supposed to wear? What am I supposed to do with my hair? Am I supposed to look like a man? Will I be, you know, and then you see articles about orchestras where there's been some sort of pushback against the female conductor who dressed too provocatively, or her hair got in the way, or something like that. And so for the women feeling like, what am I supposed to do? Is it better if I dress like a man? Is it better if I have like ruffles coming out of the end of my sleeves? And just conversations that I think, you know, I'm married to a man who can put on the same suit and go to every event, and I'm supposed to have a different dress every time I go to the event. And he's like, you just wear the suit. You wear the thing that you conducted. I'm like, yeah, that's not true for me. And you had some experience with that too.
Yeah, I personally believe like you can wear whatever you want and, you know, whatever you're comfortable in. Personally, I do dress more conservatively when I'm on the podium, mostly because I want people to be thinking about the music. I don't want people to be thinking, but if I saw a female conductor that was like, you could see kind of like the figure eight, that's fine too. Like everything, it's just like what you want to do. And I think that what we were pointing out when we talked earlier was leadership looks like a lot of different things. You don't have to look like a man, like a woman dressed as a man to be a leader. You can be very feminine and also be a leader. It's just more about your personality. It's more about like how you hold yourself. And then hairstyles, I've been told that my ponytail looked unprofessional, by a board member of the Winston-Salem Symphony, that I needed to change my hairstyle. And it was kind of conflicting, and I didn't know what to do because the bun thing, like you have to be like a pro at like making a ballet bun in order for it to not fall out, And then I didn't want to cut my hair short because that's not who I am, and nobody should ever feel like they have to get like a male style kind of cut just to be a conductor. And so it was kind of like, what? My ponytail, that's who I am. And I don't want my hair in my face either, so that it's just, well, if you don't like it, then don't see my concerts. Like this is who I am.
But this, I think, is a visibility conversation. Ultimately, the more images we have of what conductors look like, the less we'll have to fight these fights. And I know we've encountered them in terms of race too, like when we talk about hairstyles, about black hairstyles, and about things that are, especially in sports, we hear stories about people that are like not allowed to come to work looking like that, or that sort of thing. And the more representation there is, the more people there are showing up and saying, you don't have this institution, this doesn't have the right to tell me how to wear my hair, that it's not, we're going to change your idea of what professional looks like rather than changing who we are to fit that mold. And I think that is a conversation that is cracking open right now. Visibility is part of our mission statement at Maestra, because I think, so Janine Tesori is a Broadway composer. She's actually written some opera too, and she won the Tony Award for a musical called Fun Home in, I think it was 2016, possibly. And when she and her writing partner Lisa Crone, when they won the Tony Award as a female writing team, Janine talked about how important it was to be accepting this award, and how not just important for her, but important for the next generation of women. And the quote that we, painted on the wall is like, for women, you have to see it to be it. And this idea that like, if you've never seen a female conductor, no one has to tell you that you can't be a conductor. You just think, well, I can't, because they aren't. They don't look like that. And so the more visible they are, the more you see that representation in the world, the more little girls grow up thinking like, oh, I want to be that when I grow up.
That's exactly right. I remember the first time I saw Joanne Folletta conduct, and she's like my idol. And it was the first time that I thought to myself, I want to be her when I grow up. And I had never thought that of a male conductor. And I thought, it struck me, I'm like, wait a minute, I think at the time I was like 34 years old, and I had already been working for a few years. And that was the first time that I had thought that, like, I want to be her when I grow up. And I was like, that's crazy that it took me this long before thinking that, that almost all the conductors that I've studied with or seen on stage have mostly been males. And I think that representation is really important, that once you start seeing it more, it starts to become more of the norm. It doesn't, and then female conductors don't get as much pushback for like, ooh, you're a female conductor. Like sometimes I hate being called a female conductor. Like, can't I just be called a conductor? Like, I just want to be a conductor. I mean, I am a female conductor, but it's like the fact that it's still, I feel like in the future, it'll just be conductors.
My husband has a shirt that says male composer.
Right?
Which is great, yeah. And when I was an undergrad at Vanderbilt, the composition department had a grant, and they brought in composers like for a weekend, like an artist in residence sort of series. And the year that I declared my major, my advisor invited Joan Tower, the composer Joan Tower, to come be the resident. And that was transformative for me in the same way that I was like, working with her one-on-one, and she looked at my work and she gave me feedback, was transformative. I'd just never been in a situation where it wasn't a man giving me feedback. And I afterwards I said to my advisor that it had meant a whole lot to me that he did this. And he was like, he also acknowledged he did it because there were two composition majors my year and we were both women. And he was like, I just didn't know. I felt like it was my responsibility to make sure you knew who the women composers were. So I appreciate that kind of allyship and that kind of support that he acknowledged that was important and created that opportunity.
And you kind of hit on another point, which is mentorship. I think we both read the book Lean In by Sheryl Sandberg, and she talks a lot about female leadership. One of the biggest pieces of advice that she gives is she talks about, the fact that when you're a female student or like someone who's like new in a job, a lot of times your mentor is going to be male, and it can be harder to meet one-on-one with a male mentor because they might not be comfortable being with you one-on-one. If you have lunch male-female, it might look unprofessional or weird. And she points out that actually women sometimes just get fewer opportunities because we don't get to be with our mentors as often as, male students or male, people that are new to the job, right?
Well, we both have personal anecdotes about that. Do you want to tell yours about?
Yeah, I remember when I was studying at the University of North Texas, we were having an end of semester gathering at a restaurant with the studio of conductors, and I got there first, and I said, okay, well, let's go in the restaurant. He's like, no, I can't be seen with you, just me and you alone. And I was like, oh, sorry. I could understand from his perspective, I could understand that, but then it dawned on me, like, how many times have I maybe not been able to get some of that mentorship that I needed just because of that fact, just because he felt uncomfortable meeting with me in a private place. Whereas, even in my master's, sometimes I felt like my professor and his male student would go to the bar together and discuss things, and I'm missing out on those opportunities. So the advice that Sheryl Sandberg gives is that as a female student or employee, you have to kind of insist and try to make it comfortable, of course, but realize that you want that mentorship, you want that advice, you don't want to be left out just because you're female.
And then I think the responsibility becomes I consider myself what we call mid-career. I'm a mid-career with my age and my professional level. I'm a mid-career artist. And that means there are mentees who look up to me. And so it is incumbent on me to make sure that I am providing mentorship to the young girls who might feel like they don't have access to perhaps a male mentor who's not as available for whatever reason. And those are not unfounded reasons. Like my story is my composition professor in college always, when I had my private one-on-one composition lessons, he kept the door open. And he said to me at one point, he was like, I just can't create a situation where hypothetically, you might say something happened and I say it didn't happen. And then I'm going to keep the door open. Mm-hmm. And it had never occurred to me that of course I would never, I love him. He was a dear advisor. And a wonderful teacher, but he was protecting himself from a world that I was not aware of yet, and of course now I am. And I thought, okay, it's not unfounded that he needs to do that, but that is specific to gender, and that is something that we carry that maybe others don't carry. Yeah. So anyway, the flip side, I said I want to make sure that we keep it positive. The end result of that to me is I feel a responsibility to be a mentor whenever I have the opportunity. You may remember the Time's Up movement at the beginning, the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement, all the people who organized the Time's Up movement launched an initiative called the +1 initiative, which is anytime you're invited to a professional event and you get to bring a +1, instead of just bringing your spouse or your partner, your +1, your person, think about someone who would benefit from being in that room who isn't invited, and make that person your +1. So I usually try to bring a mentee or somebody who works on my staff or somebody who wouldn't have been invited to that event, and then let them come and sit at the table and meet the other people and be privy to the conversations and have the free wine and whatever it is. And that's a proactive thing that you can do to make sure that you are providing, if somebody opens the door for you, that you're keeping it open for the next person to come through instead of closing it behind you. Mm-hmm.
It's really powerful. Mm-hmm. By the way, if anyone wanted to chime in while we're speaking, because the whole Q&A at the end, you might have been like, wait, I forgot my question. So if anyone wants to raise their hand and be like, oh yes, and I wanted to point out, that's totally fine with us. Yeah, and I think that for me, like just kind of being aware of little things like okay, make sure that you're getting the mentorship that you deserve as a woman. Be aware that you're going to say, for me, going back to the yes thing, I've been in conducting positions where I also had a lot of administrative work, and I've often felt that it's so much harder to say no as a woman because of what we were talking about with like the accommodations thing. And the consequence of that can be like, then I become overloaded and then I start taking on way more than I should. And then I hate myself for that because I'm just like, well, it's my own fault for saying yes and yes and yes and yes. But also delegating can be hard. If you're in a team, a woman with male colleagues or male coworkers, it can be really hard to say, well, actually, I think that you should do this. And especially if you're a leader, you're supposed to delegate. And it's like I'm up here lecturing, but I also still struggle with it. I still have my own, I feel every single week that I'm taking on things that should have been delegated. And because it's hard as a woman to say, no, male that's 15 years older than me, you should do this. That I end up taking too much onto myself, and then I start burning out, and I think that can be heard everywhere, like in the workplace. Did you have any?
I totally agree. I just want to give support to that idea that I feel it too, and that there, if you're listening in the abstract, it's easy to say well, you should set more boundaries for yourself and be better at delegating, those sorts of things. Yes, but also there's a socialization to how we. If we go back in history, we're used to the women being the secretaries and the men being the executives. And so even though everyone's actively trying to break down those models, there's still lingering behaviors and the likability part. And I've certainly been on committees where it gets down to the thing has to be delivered tomorrow and nobody's done. And it's me and one other woman that are like, all right, we just have to finish it. It's got to, either this thing is going to fail or we're going to do it. And I'm like, why is it always us? Where are we always the one at midnight that are like, okay, but I'm going to proofread it now, and the last minute things. And I think for me, the part about delegating and leadership skills is I am not going to let it fail. I'm not going to say, well, that's not my job. I'm not going to. Somebody else will do it.
Right.
And I don't know how much of that is gendered, except for what the things we were talking about, which are about the socialization of that of the perfectionism of it, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. I think that. In wanting to be accommodating, it is hard also to have especially if you're perfectionist and a hard worker, it's very hard to be well, that's not my job, I'm not going to do it, or I'm just going to let it go. And that's when you start taking too much onto yourself. If something can't be delegated, then you absorb it, right? And I think just having the awareness of, am I saying yes to too many things? Am I actually what's fair here, and trying to develop that language and having the courage to ask your male colleagues, hey, I'm feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now, can you take this? It's hard, but it's something that I feel like the more that we bring awareness, the more that women are kind of oh yeah, me too. I also struggle with delegating to my male colleagues because it's harder for a woman to tell a male what to do. It's just harder. I I catch myself feeling sometimes scared, but then once I do it and then they actually accept it, I'm like, oh, actually, it wasn't as hard as I thought. There's just something inside that's making it harder.
I think having role models for this is great too. As you're talking, I'm thinking, who do I think will suffer no idiots? Who? And I've worked with Molly Smith, who is the artistic director at Arena Stage in Washington D.C. She's been there for 25 years. She's a little bit older than I am. She's a little bit more experienced than I am, and she's a director. And I think I've just watched her in situations where she'll just suffer fools. She will not suffer fools. And so there are just situations where she's like, we're not doing that. or great, I'm going to give that to Rick, he's going to do that, or and I think, okay, so in the moments where I'm feeling what you're describing, I have my what would Molly Smith do in this moment? What would she do?
Right.
And so maybe the being able to identify the person who is good at it as a role model, and to channel them in that moment of Molly Smith would not be up at midnight trying to fix the font on this graphic design. She would not. She
Right.
would. Yeah.
I think also defining job responsibilities sometimes. I mean, it can feel weird, but if you say, actually this kind of falls into your job category, not mine. I'm the conductor, I'm not the administrator, but I'm taking on all these administrative tasks. I often find myself doing that even in my current job is, why am I doing all of the administrative work when I'm actually the conductor, I'm not the administrator? And I often wonder too, I sometimes ask myself, would a male conductor be taking on this much? And I always feel like the answer is no. I always feel like it's just so much easier for them to say, that's not my job. And as a woman, how do you say that? That's not my job? Yeah.
So what you're talking about now is something I'm thinking of. Maybe it's because we have experiences with trying to work with other people, and then them failing to do their job, which they're paid to do, whether they are paid or not, and then just having to put it on yourself because you need this thing done. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what it sounds like you're saying, because I've experienced this at this point.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, it's this would have happened if we did it, or this would have happened if our team did it instead of them, because they failed to do their job. So I think that's about their heart.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you want to? I think what you're saying, I'm just going to repeat it for people who might not have been able to hear you, which is that she said that sometimes it's this universal thing of my team had this responsibility and that team had that responsibility and they didn't do their part successfully, so then my team has to step in and do it. It would have been better if we had just done it ourselves at the beginning. I mean, a lot of that is team dynamics, management of team dynamics, and ultimately to the degree that you can, so we don't hire that team anymore, so we don't work with them anymore. And my master's degree in collaboration is very much about with playwrights and lyricists and composers. Sometimes it's teams of 2 people and sometimes it's teams of 3 people, but figuring out how everyone on the team can get what they need, can get what they need. The scene isn't working, but you're the book writer, and so how do I write the song when the scene isn't working? So we got to work together to get that. Just the dynamics of team building and what it means to be collaborative to get something to the finish line without just saying okay, fine, I'll do it, which is the part that we have to beat ourselves up about a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, I also have something I'm curious. You guys mentioned Me Too briefly, and do you feel like things have shifted or changed in the past? I think since 2016 or 2018. Do you feel it? And if so, how can we continue that? What are our action items that we can take on to keep, poking the bear, I guess is a way to think of it. Just what's next, really?
Sarah, you're asking about the Me Too movement specifically, and whether that's had an effect on the workplace, do you think?
Yeah, how does it feel?
It's interesting. I'm not sure if it's had a direct impact. I think maybe subconsciously there's been maybe a shift in people recognizing women are speaking up and women are wanting equality and women want to be treated equally. I guess I don't have the answer. I don't have the I would hope that there would be. I think that to be honest, it's the more that we see female leaders, the more that we kind of experience a Kamala Harris or a Sheryl Sandberg or, Joanne Folletta, seeing those female leaders and seeing their leadership and kind of witnessing how they're doing it. One thing that when I watched Joanne Folletta's rehearsals is I was carefully kind of studying how she was rehearsing the orchestra and how she got so much command from, but also just all this command, but she's a tiny woman. and how actually she would like never raise her voice, and she'd always actually kind of make the orchestra like lean in to hear her instead of, you know, and that was something kind of interesting that I was like, I don't know what the psychology is behind that, but she's doing something that's making her powerful.
That's right. I was taught that as a conductor too, that when you feel like you're losing control of the orchestra, your instinct, this is not gendered, this is universal, but your instinct is to like make bigger gestures, and that actually if you're like, nope, we're here, the beat is here, this is what we're doing, then the orchestra goes, and it's like you pull focus to you. And so it's interesting to hear that I think I use that conducting metaphor in non-conducting spaces sometimes, like what can you do, like in public speaking or in teaching, like what can you do, maybe not if you're teaching 12-year-olds, but otherwise, like what can you do to like draw attention to you, and because people are like, I'm missing it because I'm talking, let me turn my attention there. And the same thing with if your gestures get really big as a conductor, it's easy to be like, oh, she's being emotional, or he's being emotional or whatever, but that when you make the gesture smaller, people have to pay attention. I wanted to like address the Me Too movement. I feel like it's sort of hard to have this conversation without acknowledging the pandemic. Like there was the Me Too movement, there was the George Floyd murder, and then there was this reckoning, and then we all like were in social isolation for at least the Broadway community for 18 months. The Broadway shut down, nobody was working, and so every organization that I'm related to had a Zoom call where we're like, we're gonna have it out. Like we're gonna have a conversation about inequity. We're gonna have, people are gonna sign pledges, and we're gonna, bring in consultants, and so we had conversations where people spoke about the injustices that they had encountered in the workplace, not in an HR way, but in a just like human to human way. And the airing of those grievances was transformative for our industry. There were just stories that I heard and that other, that producers heard that they just had not known. Or, things that people have not felt like they had been given space. And so the result that I feel in the theater community is there are a lot more consultants around in the rehearsal room. I just did Parade, which is running on Broadway right now. I was the pianist for it off Broadway at the Encore series, which is like a limited run series at City Center in New York City, and then it transferred to Broadway, and I'm a sub pianist on it. I play it a couple times a week now. And that rehearsal process, we had sensitivity training, we had cultural training, we had various religious people. The story is about a Jewish man in 1913 who is the musical posits wrongly accused of murdering a girl, and in the South in Georgia, and the community of Georgia wanted so much to like solve the case that they decided he was guilty because he was an outsider. And so the show looks at what is it to be an outsider and to like take on everybody's hatred. And then there's a community of Black people in the town too in 1912, 1913. And there's one lyric in the in one of the songs that says, if a little Black girl had been murdered, we would be having a different conversation. So it then suddenly race is in it, religion, Judaism, like Christianity, the South, the North. And so one of the things we dealt with in that process was the acknowledgement, like if you and I are actors and we're in a scene together and my character has to say something hateful to your character and like full of rage because I'm acting in that moment, and then we finish the scene and we go off stage, like our bodies remember that thing. Like your body still carries that tension. And so what are the tools that we have to come out of that space together? Just acknowledging that historically artists who have to make things that carry so much emotion so it used to be that you'd like go drink afterwards, or you'd just go home and be sad. And what are the tools that we have to acknowledge like your humanity has value, my humanity has value. We just had to do a hard thing together. Let's exhale together before we leave the building. Like one of the actors says, like I think the lead actor hung a mezuzah outside his door, and he's Jewish, his character's Jewish, and he said, I always tap it when I leave, and I'm like, I say goodnight to this character, and I leave him in this space, and he's not me, and I go out into the world. And I just don't remember ever having those conversations before. So that's not so specific to music, and it's not so specific to Me Too, but it is just like, I do feel like there's a cultural shift in how we're acknowledging each other's humanity as artists in order to make the work. And that is a direct result of the fact that there is more diversity in the workplace than there was 20 years ago, which is a direct result of this work that we're all doing.
Right. I think if there would be one thing to like also take away from, okay, we don't have like the direct answers for like how do you deal with a difficult situation when you feel like as a female in the workplace it's either hard to delegate, hard to say no, or you're just not being treated fairly. And I would say that awareness of, okay, like for me, I sometimes, like I was saying earlier, like I'm aware, like I'm feeling afraid to say no. I feel like I can't say this. But if I bring awareness to the fact that another thing that Sheryl Sandberg has in her book is the psychology of how little girls are raised to act nice, to play nice, to be kind to each other and to be respectful, and you're not supposed to shout, you're not supposed to be bold, and we're kind of praised for being really like sweet to each other, right? So then as adults, it's harder for us to then be assertive, right? And so I think that kind of having that awareness and saying, okay, it's harder for me to do this, but let me just try. And I want to try it, of course, in a non-emotional, like not being too emotional, not being like, but just very calm and collected and saying, coworker, I would really like for you to take on this task today. And it's like may seem harder in the moment, but then like when you just kind of get past the realization that, I there's part of me that doesn't want to do this, but actually I need to get past that. And I need to realize that I can say that or maybe even have the thought of, if I were male, how would I do this? Like how do my male colleagues do that? Why is it so much harder for me to be like that? I don't know if that's good advice, like the if I were male kind of mentality.
Maybe, yeah, it might not be. But I also think one of the things I've learned is that when you are brave enough to say, like, to delegate that thing, it is often true that the person who is receiving it is happy for the clarity of the task. Like, great, okay, I am expected to do this, therefore I will do it. As opposed to the like, well, I don't know, maybe she's going to do it, maybe I'm going to, like the vagueness that, there are times when I send an email from Maestra and there are 3 or 4 people CC'd on it, and I'm like, can somebody do this? And I've gotten feedback that the people are like, I just didn't know if I was supposed to do it. But if I'm like, Carrie, you do this, Judy, you do this, Adam, you do this, I'm thinking of the people specifically on my staff. And that is the leadership. Like, I'm not doing it, but these are the people it seems appropriate to do your job that you do it. That they're all like, great, okay, so I'm doing this, and that is helpful. So even in some ways, I think about like fundraising, that it's so hard to ask for money because you're like, oh God, why you ask for money? But the people who want to donate are excited to donate to something that they believe in and that they feel like they can be part of. And so it's a similar psychology to if you're brave enough or strong enough to ask for the thing you need, that sometimes the person receiving it is happy to have been asked. And so it takes a little bit of the onus off you of like, I feel so bad asking, that maybe that part can go away. Yeah. I'm your therapist now.
I sometimes also think of, like when we talk about fear and we talk about, I sometimes think that there's a lot that comes back to our primitive nature that, male, female, like it can feel threatening, like because males are bigger, it's like a primitive thing of like, well, it's harder to approach someone when they might like attack you back, even though we're not animals, we're not like that, but we may have like this primitive nature to us that's still built in. And then kind of also realizing like, well, we should be past that as humans now. This is all like the science behind equality is actually, to me, thinking of the fact that like, well, why aren't we still equal? And kind of, does it come back to our primitive roots in a way? Does that make sense? Like
I'm sure it's in there.
I feel like the reason, so also I, as a conductor, will sometimes have musicians that seem to kind of question me more than I feel like they would question a male conductor. maestra, do you really want to take that tempo? And I feel like it's easier for musicians to ask me because I'm not as threatening. And that comes back to that primitive nature of like, it's easier to question a woman because she's not going to attack you. Even though we don't attack anymore, but it kind of comes back to those roots. And, how do you tackle that? Of course, I can't do anything to change their psychology, but again, just having the awareness of, I'm going to, it's going to be easier to kind of question me because of that, maybe.
But also the answer is yes, I'm sure that this is my tempo. Yeah.
Right. And then you have to combat that and not be scared and not be like, oh, so, he's questioning me. It's like almost like a threat. And no, like I have to be aware of like my confidence in that answer, but I sometimes think that it comes back to primitive roots.
That's interesting. One other thing. Oh, okay, go ahead. There's a question.
Yeah, I think as a man in a workplace, how can I find a way to make comfortable, like open arena for, this type of dialogue? So there's not as much of a thought process to, every, decision or discussion.
It's an interesting question. Yeah.
If there's an answer.
There are many answers. I mean, one of the things that I think of, I'm going to get it wrong, and you're going to all go home and Google it and tell me I'm wrong. But there was some story about how in Obama's presidency, he had a predominantly female staff, and he had a tendency to talk over them. And so, somebody would say, "I have an idea," and that would go missed. And then he'd say, or a man in the room would say, what about such and such? And it would be the same idea that the woman had just said. And so the women on the staff made a pact to amplify what the other woman had said. And so if you had made the comment and been spoken over, and then I watched that go by, I could say, I believe that was what Jessica just said earlier. And I can shine attention on that. And so I think of that as an allyship and an advocacy. And so you could do that in the space for people too, not just women, but anyone that you feel like is being steamrolled or ignored or something, that you can use your ally, your advocacy work to say I see the work that's happening over here. I'm just going to shine a light on it, in whatever way is possible, because this person's work is going unnoticed, or this person's, or we have we just did some training at Maestra called bystander training. That's what do you do when you're in a situation and you see something go really wrong, or you see somebody wronged, or you hear somebody say something that's totally offensive, and you're like, I don't want to step into that because then I'm a part of it and I don't know if I have the right thing. So we offered bystander training to our staff to what are the tools, what are the things that you can do, and so that could be something too to look into what is bystander training, what is the world in which you can participate in that.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, just to chime in on that, like she was saying, I think having an awareness of these patterns and being a part of these conversations to further that awareness and to further agreement in yourself, then you'll be able to see it more often when it's happening, and then build in that allyship that we're talking about.
Mm-hmm. And if we all do that too, then I'm also advocating for you. You're advocating for me. We're having each other's backs. That's to me the community part of it is not and I was about to say something when you asked your question, and in some ways it links back, because one of the things that I keep coming back to and I keep investigating is, why does it matter? Why does equity matter? And I think working in the Broadway space, if you're gonna if you're a show and there are two trombone players in the pit, why does it matter if one of them is a woman, or if both of them are women, or if they're, why does it matter? If the job is you should play the show the same every night, and if you're out, your sub should play it so that it sounds like you, so that everybody's not oh, we've got a different trombone player tonight. That your job is to play the music, follow the conductor, do the job. Why does it matter? And it's been really hard for me to answer that from a musical point of view. Why does it matter if your conductor is female or male? Why does it matter? And the answers that I am finding are coming out of the corporate world in some ways, that it's not so much about the music making, it's about the workspace. It's about what does it feel like to come to work? What does it feel like to come to a work where you feel like your contribution to your workspace is valued? What does it feel like to come to a workspace where you feel safe, where you feel like everybody is glad that you're there and feels like you have a unique contribution, even if it's not with how you articulate that phrase musically, but it's that your presence in the room has value and that you are part of a team, and that the team functions differently if it's homogeneous, whatever that is. If it's all male, if it's all female, if it's all cisgendered, if it's all white, if it's all whatever, that the team functions differently, and that the diverse voices in the workplace are part of what make the creativity stronger. There are statistics that say it makes the productivity higher, but it certainly makes people feel safer. You know, we've had lots of instances of people being the only whatever in a room, like in your own workspace, you're the only gay person, you're the only black person, you're the only whatever it is, and then something comes up and people look to you like, well, you're the expert, like, is this offensive? And you're like, I mean, it's offensive to me. I can't speak for everyone who's like me, but somehow you become the de facto expert on the thing that you embody. And when there are two of you in the room, that doesn't happen as much. And so the way the workspace improves when we lean into the value of diversity and inclusion is starting to be quantifiable.
Interesting. I think also to add, so we're talking about like shining a light when women are trying to speak at the table and say, oh, I think she had to say something, you know, but then also if you're in some kind of team where you see that a woman is maybe taking on too much and you're like, oh, she's actually having a hard time saying no, maybe I can, like, as a male say, hey, are you taking on too much? I think just naturally, again, at least for me, it's just so much. If someone says, can you do this? Oh, yes, sure, I'll do that. Yes, you know, you want to be people pleasing, and to kind of recognize that it's just harder for women to say no. And as a male in a team, just say, you know, are the women actually taking too much? You know, and what can I do? What can I do to equalize that? You know, so that's my advice on that. Any other? You had a question.
No, I just wanted to add, like, just going off that comment, and I'm putting on, like, my mom hat, but, you know, if something happens at the school with my kids, they never call the dad, they call the mom. Even though the dad does a ton of stuff, they always call the mom. So it's just that psychology.
You said the word mom, and my, like, a chapter, like, what is the word? Like a whole segment of my brain opened. I was like, we haven't even talked about parenting. Oh my gosh, we haven't even talked about that part yet. But you're absolutely right. I'm a mom as well. And I always call it out when I get, like, a text thread and all the moms are on the text thread, and I add my husband to it, you know, and I'm just actively saying, like, please, because we're both working, and sometimes he does the pickup and sometimes I do the pickup and all that. And I'm like, I can't be the carrier of all this information that I'm going to, like, only distill to him what he needs to know. And there are so many ways. Like when I have two daughters, and when they were young, I remember one instance where both of us were in, we have a space where we each have a room with a piano and a door that closes. And so we were both in our offices with the doors closed, and one of my daughters knocked on my door and said, Mommy, can you? And I was like, I can't, I'm working, go ask Dad. And they were like, but he's writing music. And I was like, I'm also writing music. That's literally what I'm doing. But it was just like, oh, his work is important. And just, not that they think my work is not important, but that the, like, mom will help is just built into that. And then the other thing about momming is I was in a conversation with I'm trying to not get too in the weeds with this, but with a group of women who were playwrights who were identifying that, like, we were talking about the conversations that happen at the bar, or that, like, in the corporate world is, like, decisions that get made on the golf course, you know, just sort of things that spaces women aren't invited into. And a lot of the mid-career advancement for playwrights is going away to writers' retreats. Like 10 or 12 people get chosen to go away to a writers' retreat, and for a week, they'll provide your meals, and there's a communal dinner, and you're sitting around with other playwrights and you're talking about your work, and sometimes there are producers in the room or dramaturgs in the room, and they're like, oh, I'm interested, why don't you come do that at our theater? And, like, opportunities grow out of that. And one of the women said, like, from age 32 to 45, I was not able to do that. I was not able to go because I couldn't leave my kids during that time. And one of the things that evolved out of it was this organization created a family-friendly writers' retreat where parents, not just women, but parents could go to the writers' retreat and have that experience. And they also built like a day camp experience for the kids. I think the kids had to be 12 and under. There were like these certain parameters built into it. But the idea that like we can create a situation, the fact that you have kids shouldn't keep you out of your ability to work at this level. And I thought that took a creative situation with a mom saying, I can't do this, for somebody to think, oh, well, how can we solve that? And so I think in some cases it's like like asking the people who are suffering from the exclusion, what might make you feel less excluded or make you be less excluded, and what could we do? And in this case, it was like, what if we create a different model for how writers' retreats work? And I've been very inspired by that. Like, what can we do to change the model? You know, one of the many of the women of my generation have stories about being nursing moms and like nursing in bathroom stalls in rehearsal rooms or like in a car, in your car in a parking lot or something. And so there's a movement now, there's an organization that's like trying to create a lactation room in every Broadway theater. Like you should just be able to, you should not have to like go into a bathroom stall to do that. That is a part of being human, and that there are moms who, like new moms who work at the Broadway level, and so how can we accommodate them? But again, that hasn't always been there.
And I also just want to add about the bystander comment. It's interesting because, again, at my daughter's school, in the elementary schools, they teach a program. Instead of being a bystander, you're an upstander. So an upstander is somebody, you see something, you say something, you do something. So it's just like turning the positive, like, don't be a bystander and sit there and do nothing, but be an upstander and do something about it. So it's that psychology, like teaching people at younger ages. Hopefully that will eventually create, a new generation of people and thinkers about how they act when they see something. So I just thought that was an interesting.
That's a great twist of words for that particular problem.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm a high school teacher. I also have an orchestral conducting background.
Oh, great.
And I guess I would ask if you have advice for young women who are either considering careers in music or already applying to music degrees for undergrad, that might not be something that I would think to advise them, given my perhaps life experience.
Yeah, I mean, is like either music education or conducting, or like when I say like, conducting beyond high school, or, I mean, I would say, that conducting, of course, is becoming more and more, male, female. They're going to still run into like issues. It's funny because when I started conducting, I was in high school. I was like sophomore in my high school orchestra, and my teacher had to run to the office. Who wants to conduct? Oh, I want to conduct. And I like, it didn't occur to me at that time when I was a high schooler that there was any kind of bias or that there was any kind of weirdness about a female being on the podium. Like, I just wanted to conduct. I had a natural instinct to want to be on the podium. And when I reflect on it, it's always interesting to me that I ran into problems the more I went into it, that it wasn't actually there at all in the beginning when I was just a high school student. And I think one piece of advice is that they may go into conducting or music education thinking like that it's just a completely equal world, and that ideally we would like it to be, but that they're going to run into things along the way that make it feel that are challenges. And I don't know if I'm making sense in that way.
I mean, I've been told that a lot of women in their 20s think that there isn't a glass ceiling anymore, and my response to that is they just haven't hit it yet. Like,
right.
They haven't run into it yet. I mean, I think my answer to you is that if you can be intentional about acknowledging that these women are heading into a world where they'll be the minority. Anyone who's heading into a world where they'll be the minority, what can you do? There are posters that are like women composers that you could have on the wall just so they see them. There, you know, I think about my daughter who's in high school. When I look at the books that she has to read for her English class, there's real intentionality of like who the authors are, race, gender, culture, and I didn't have that. Like, I think I was in college before I ever read anyone who wasn't like a white man from the white man canon in my literature. I didn't have any women teachers except my piano teacher for a long time in music school until Joan Tower came in. And so I think helping people see the network that's around them, like where are the places where there are people like you, you're not the only one. And then just helping them see the pathway for success so that when they bump into that glass ceiling. Here's another anecdote. A friend of mine is a voice teacher, and she was working with a student who was in music school, in high school. She had been her high school voice teacher, and so like when the student was home from college, she would take a lesson with her old teacher. And she was a sophomore, and she was trying to decide whether she was going to major in voice or composition. And she was just on the cusp, and she was talking through it with her voice teacher. And she said, well, I think I'm probably going to major in voice because it's easier. And she was like, what do you mean it's easier? And she said, well, the composition department, all the teachers are men and all the other majors are men. And so I would be the only woman doing that. And I just don't know if I'm like a trailblazer like that way. I just think it would be hard. And so if I major in voice, I can still compose on the side. And so my friend told me this story, and I was like livid. Like, we just lost a composer. Like, she and I knew the head of the composition department at her college. So I called him and I said, I just want you to know this is happening. Like, there's this woman who wants to major in composition, and she thinks it'll be too hard because she doesn't want to be a trailblazer. And he said, who is it? And I said, it's not about who it is. It's like, what are you doing to proactively, like, the way that my teacher brought Joan Tower in, like, what are the models that you're setting? What are the ways maybe you're intentional about making sure that if she majors in composition, she's not the only woman in the department? Like, what are the things that you're doing to like create space for her to thrive? And I'll argue you should do that for every student. You know, you should do that for the white male students. You should do that for the people of color. You should do that for the gender nonconforming people. You should do that for the people with limited ability. I got tripped up on the word, but the people with limited abilities, like you can, all the things that we do for accessibility, that to me is like seeing people as individuals and saying, what do I need to do as a mentor or as an educator to like help illuminate the path that this person is about to step into.
And to add on to that, for me, the struggle with like being a female conductor has been a lack of seeing female conductor role models, not necessarily for gestural technique, but for rehearsing and for that being commanding on the podium. Like because when you see someone that, you feel like you can emulate them, then you really learn how to like, I feel like it's so much easier. Like if I see a woman, that's how she says it, and there's something maybe slightly different in how she's saying it. And I think that in my undergrad and in high school, I think I wish that I had seen more female conductors, not necessarily for their visual gestural technique, but for how they command a room and how they speak to the orchestra. The rehearsal technique was something that I struggled with for a long time, and it's for everybody. I mean, rehearsal technique takes years, but to see really good people who know how to rehearse really well is really important. But for females to see other females rehearsing is key. So I would get them, if they can go to some of the local universities. I know there's Julia Baumanis at Rutgers University and, other female conductors around the area.
Or just a YouTube channel, a really great, there's the Institute for Composer Diversity. I'm talking about more about composers and conductors, but you can go down a rabbit hole. Or really, if you, as the teacher, did the research and like women conductors, what comes up, and then you said here, sometimes I've done that before, and you'll find some article that is like, here are 10 great female conductors working now, and you can send that to your student and just say, make sure you know these people. Anything that you can do to like a little extra. There are people like you. You're not the only one.
Yeah.
Yes, hi.
So this is kind of a good segue into what he was saying. So I am in high school, I'm a senior, and I am going to music education.
Oh, great. Awesome.
And in my high school, I have 2 head directors, and they're both male. And then the 8th grade director is male, and the 7th grade director is male, but the 6th grade director is female, and the elementary directors are all female. And the assistant director at my high school is female. But I don't want to be an assistant. Or, like, people come up to me all the time, I'll tell them, like, I'm going to music ed, they'll be like, oh, you would be so great with elementary school kids. But I don't want to work with elementary school kids. I want to be, like, in charge or whatever. Like, how do I even get there? Like, in college or anything, like, how do I even push that?
What do you want to teach high school, like the top band or the top orchestra?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you take yourself seriously, which is, I know that sounds weird, but like, just take yourself, like, don't sell yourself short compared to your male colleagues. Like, you are just as good as them. You know, you have just as much ability as your, and then you go to your music ed professors and you say, this is my goal. Like, from day one, you say, I want to be a high school band director. I want to be teaching the top group. Or, you know, do you want to even go beyond that? And sometimes it's about kind of taking those extra conducting courses, you know, or getting the extra mentorship that you need, like a mentorship from the band directors at whatever university you're attending. Do you know what school you're going to?
Westchester.
Westchester, yeah. I don't know the directors there. I'm new to this area, but yeah, I mean, you would kind of like, don't be afraid to come up to some of those conductors and ask for an extra mentorship. You know, I mean, sometimes you'd be surprised. People are very willing to say, like, yeah, sure, I can give you extra advice. I can point you in the right direction, you know. And I think that, like, we're sometimes afraid to ask for help, or we're afraid to, like, go after things, you know, the way that maybe some of your male colleagues would. And you just have to have that boldness and, like, say, yes, I want to go for it.
You know, I actually looked this statistic up recently, but this goes back to the Sheryl Sandberg book, Lean In, and the statistic it's from the Harvard Business Review or Journal, which I can't cite perfectly, but it's if there's a job application and a man reads the job application and says, I have 60% of those qualifications, he'll apply for the job. And women need 100% of the qualifications to apply for the job. That there is something about, like, then you can start to analyze what that is. Like, is it the fear of rejection? Like, some of the women said, like, I just don't want to put in the effort to apply because I'm not going to get it anyway. Or, like, you know, the ways that we psych ourselves out of feeling like we're competitive. And so I would say there's an external response to what you're saying, which is like, how can the world make space for you? And then there's the internal response, is just how can I be ready for the space that I need to inhabit in the world? And so to that part, I think, you know, I challenged myself, like, would I apply for a job if I thought I only had 60% of the qualifications? And if I'm like, no, I probably wouldn't, then why? Why? If this guy next to me is going to, and he's going to get it, and then I'm going to be mad that he got it, and I know he's not qualified either, then what if I just try? And so there is, you know, to think about working on it on both fronts. Like, what do I need to do to be ready? And then also, how do I need to make sure that the system that I'm stepping into is ready to, like, crack open and make space for me?
And don't be intimidated by when you go to a conducting workshop, if you ever do that, you know, maybe everyone's going to be male around you, you know, but don't let I've been intimidated by that before, like, where I'm like, oh, they're all better than me. You know, you just kind of assume, like, because, you know, at least I assumed, oh, they're, you know, all these guys here, you know, who am I, you know, and, you know, it actually has nothing to do. I mean, like, the thing about conducting is that there's nothing that says that a female body is, like, less capable of doing a good job at conducting than a male body. You know what I mean? Like, the physical gestural stuff, it's I don't know how to explain that. It's like, I think that we assume that just because maybe a man stands taller that, you know, he seems more like a conductor, but that's absolutely not the case, you know, and that there is, you know, there just watch a lot of good female role models.
I was going to say the same thing. Make sure you know who the role models are. Like, that is what I want my career to look like that. Like, she has what I want.
I'm forgetting the woman's name at Allentown, the Allentown Symphony. There's a female conductor there. I think that's close to Westchester.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really, really close. Yeah.
What's her name? Yeah, so you can go and watch her. you know. And I think Natalie Stoltzman sometimes conducts the Philadelphia Orchestra. I need to go see her. But were there any? We have about 3 minutes. Are any other questions? Last minute questions? Yes.
So for us looking at you two, you know, you look like not only have you been invited to the room, but you're sitting at the table. Do you feel like that? Like personally, do you feel like you've made it, you've made your mark, or do you feel like you're still fighting?
I feel like I'm still fighting, personally. In ways, I am proud of what I've accomplished, and like it's great to be reinvited to conduct with the Charlotte Symphony. It's like, you know, you kind of feel like, okay, like I've earned the respect of like certain employers, you know, and like they know I can do the job. But I think sometimes I feel, well, I don't want to give like too much specificity, but like sometimes I do feel like I'm still being left out of things, and I can't get past like sometimes wishing like, oh, if I were male. And I hate that I say that, but it's the reality of it. You know, oh, if I were male, I would have been invited to that conversation. I would have been taken more seriously. And I don't know what to say. It's like I still kind of I do feel like I still struggle a little bit, you know, and that's just maybe I still have to kind of work on my assertiveness. Yeah.
So you don't feel that way. When you brush your teeth, you don't feel that way. When you wash your face, you don't feel that way.
No.
So your first approach is to bring an imaginary mirror. Bring that prop all the time. I'm better than everybody. I'm wonderful. I'm beautiful. You don't feel that way. Male or female or any other kind of gender. Because I'm better than them.
Yeah.
So start bringing that imaginary mirror.
I love your mirror. I love that. I mean, my answer is I think the answer is yes to both. Like I am very aware that I'm in the room and I have a seat at the table. I'm very aware that I've earned the respect of my peers. Maybe, like I definitely feel it like in the not-for-profit because of Maestra that has secured me a place in the industry, in the history books, like whatever. I did that. Musically, I am so ambitious that I feel like I still have a lot to do, but I don't know that I feel like gender is holding me back from that. In speaking to like my own business, my own stuff is like that I have said yes to too many things and I'm overcommitted, but not from a leadership point of view, from a like, I don't have time to write unless I prioritize it, unless I say, okay, I'm blocking out, you're not going to get me on a Zoom call today because I'm going to finish this movement or this piece or whatever. That's a time management thing, and that's just my own business. I have to take responsibility for that and carve out the space to do it. So I feel like I have growth to do there, but I acknowledge that still fighting, yes. But also, I do feel like I have established something, and that with that comes a responsibility to make sure, like what I was saying before, that I'm like keeping the door open for other people who maybe don't feel as secure in that I'm like, hey, we had a fundraiser at Maestra that we were like calling it "Come Sit by Me," that just like, come sit by me while I conduct, watch what I do. Come sit by me while I play, watch what I do. Come sit by me at this board meeting and watch how we win the room, and like just so that you can, you can see that it's not that impossible that you could do it too.
And I to add on, I think like when you do feel like you're not being invited into the table or to the conversation, I think that, don't be afraid to make an issue and to say, I feel like I'm being left out, and that in a weird way, it's like, I'm currently kind of dealing with that right now. I'm raising my voice and saying I'm feeling left out. And an employer actually should kind of be attentive to, how do you feel that you're not being invited to the table, and I feel like it's okay to kind of say, I do feel like maybe I'm being treated differently. It's hard, it's hard to do that. But
it's an easier argument to make when you can, you can cite specific things. So like if you're really in a position where you're like preparing for that conversation, I'd say start documenting
Mhm.
things, both
Mhm.
statistical things, and also there was this time when this happened and I was not included. There was this time where, so that there's some sort of empirical evidence that is not just I feel. 'Cause that is an
Right,
easy
yeah,
thing. It's an
that's-
easy thing to dismiss.
That's-
Not for someone to dismiss.
That's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that answered your question.
So I think this is the perfect time to thank you guys for coming to sit by us.
Sit by me.
I really appreciate it. I learned a lot. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us, and thank you all for coming out.